What's going on, guys? G2 here. Welcome back to the channel. Not at the range today. We are in the kitchen because I want to share a recipe with you that I have been working on. I have done all the research. I've watched videos, checked recipes, done all the legwork, and I have found the best Neapolitan pizza dough ever. Couple things. We're going to do this by hand, but if you have a KitchenAid mixer like we have back there, we've done it using a KitchenAid. Just make sure you've got one of these fancy dough hooks. Follow the same process. But for this video, I'm going to show you how to do it by hand in the event that you don't have that KitchenAid mixer. And we're only using about 6 ingredients. We've got our flour here. Now, traditionally, Neapolitan uses 00 flour. Might be hard for you to find. Out here in the sticks where we're at, 00. Probably got to get it shipped into you. So what we're going to use is half bread flour and half all-purpose. Now, why half and half? Well, it's because of the gluten content. This dough is key to having the correct gluten content. If you use all bread flour, it's going to come out cakey. It's going to be like a bread. It's going to rise, and we don't want that. So by incorporating the all-purpose in there, we're going to, for lack of a better term, use it as like a leavening ingredient, so it doesn't rise as much. We're going to have water, cold water, salt, and then we have our yeast. Yeast and cold water. Seriously? Seriously. So we've tried this with warm water, we tried it with lukewarm water, we tried it with the suggested 110 degree water. Cold water works best. We're not trying to activate this yeast into superpower mode and really rise that dough. What we want is to have it in there so that when we go and we knead it and we incorporate that air back into the dough, we'll get those nice bubbles along the edge. And for that, you're going to use this like your standard active yeast, right, that you get in the grocery store in these little packets. These packets are 1/4 ounce or 7 grams. You're only going to use 1/4 of this packet. Let's call it 1.5 grams. So the extra yeast, if you like to keep it, put it in a glass container, throw it in your fridge, and then we've got a little bit of olive oil. So first thing we're going to do here, and I'll bring it in when we get into the good part, is you're going to add your cold water, and then we're going to add our salt. And we want to whisk that salt until it is completely dissolved into the water. The salt is important. This is the only point in the process that you have the opportunity to season your dough. You want it to add like a rosemary or oregano or something into your crust, you can do that as well. And now that we have that done, at this point, traditional recipes, you would add sugar or something along those lines to activate the yeast. We're not doing that. Now, you can't just go ahead and put the yeast in at this point because the salt water will kill the yeast. So what you need to do is you need to create a buffer, kind of a nice, safe environment for that yeast to be incorporated in there without damaging it. So what you do is you're going to take some of your flour, and what you want to do is you want to create something similar to like a very loose batter, almost like a crepe batter or a loose pancake batter. Now again, if you're using your KitchenAid mixer, at this point you would want to be using your whisk attachment. When we start to add the dough, you would go and use your dough hook. Now we're just going to add our yeast to this, almost like a slurry, so to speak. Add our yeast, we're going to give it a little stir. You can see, when you see bubbles immediately, that you know you've got good yeast. If when you add that yeast, you don't see any bubbles, start over, because your yeast is dead and you're not going to get any leavening. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you guys in a little tighter. We're going to work on this dough, adding our flour, and you can see how that turns out. All right, so now you can see kind of the texture of that slurry, right? It's kind of loose, but it is definitely not just water. That flour is acting as a buffer. So you're just going to start adding your flour. And Obviously, using a KitchenAid would make this process a lot easier because it's going to get messy here in a minute. Okay. So use your hands, get that dough in there. You're gonna get pretty gross. Use the one-hand method, right? Now you're gonna add the flour. I like adding it a half cup measurement at a time because you can always add more flour. You can't take it away. So now we're really starting to come together nicely. All right, so we just added the last of our flour here. And we can see how that dough has really come together. Now there's a lot of flour still left in this bowl. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna transfer it over to our countertop here. Okay, looks kind of rough, don't worry. And now that we've gotten to this point, right, it's still sticky in the middle, okay? We're gonna get away from our flour here, and we're just gonna go ahead and knead this, just like so. Press and fold. And you will see as you do this, how it's starting to stick, right? So we're gonna get some flour, put it on the dough, and flour on the dough, and knead and fold. And you're gonna do this for about 15 to 20 minutes, okay? This is, if you're using the KitchenAid, you gotta take it out of the KitchenAid. The KitchenAid will not do this for you. This is, you're gonna have to get your hands dirty. So knead and fold. You're gonna continue doing this until you kind of get rid of those sticky parts of the dough. So once you've gotten to this point and you've used all of your flour, right? All my flour is gone. It's okay to add a little bit more. So just work. You're going to use this regular all-purpose. We don't need to use anything fancy for this. Just sprinkle onto the bottom and work your dough on the flour, and then work that flour into the dough. Let's see, yeah, we need just a little bit more. It's always better to, like I said, add it. You can't take it out. Okay, so it's been about 15 minutes. We've only added one more little sprinkle of dough, and we're right where we need to be. This is just slightly sticky in the middle, but it's not coming up with my hands. I can work it, no problem. But at this point, we want to stop. We're going to grab yourself a sheet pan. Some people like to put it back in there. I'm not a huge fan of that, so a little olive oil. Get some olive oil on your hands, because you're going to want to put that on the dough. And what this will do, keep it from drying out. And we've put just a little bit on the top here. So now grab yourself a kitchen towel, wet it with cold water, and cover your dough. And you're going to let this sit out at room temperature for 2 hours. Okay, so here we are, 2 hours later. Take a look, and you can see that dough has easily doubled in size. Right, so what we're going to do now is we are going to lightly flour it. Right, so this side. Beautiful. So for this particular recipe, you can get yourself about 4 dough balls. So we'll cut this in half. Cut it in half again. So now we have our 4 individual dough balls. Get this dough and you just want to stretch it. Now there's a bunch of different ways you can use. You can stretch the dough. You can just kind of work, and see how we work the inside like that. But our ultimate goal here is to have a nice, smooth top. See how smooth that is? In comparison, almost like a mozzarella. You're slightly stretching the top of the dough, just working it into a dough ball. Right? Tucking it, we're just stretching and tucking and just going around in a circular motion here. You don't have to work this very hard. Perfect. And that's it. So now we have our 4 portions. What we're going to do is we're going to grab our olive oil, put it on our pan, the olive oil. We're going to get our balls and we're going to place them in our pan. So, just to stop the dough from drying out. If this dough is left to sit for, I would say, 20 minutes or so uncovered, what you're going to find is that the skin is going to develop on your dough. It's no good. So once you have that, you're just going to cover the whole thing in saran wrap. Alright, so there we go. We've got this all covered. You can grab your towel. It should still be a little wet. Just put it over top. And we're just going to set this on the counter and leave it minimum 6 hours to 24 is the best. The reason we don't refrigerate this, the minute that this goes into a cold temperature, the yeast will become dormant, right? So it'll still mature in flavor, but you won't get that additional rise. That second rise is what's going to give you that super, super bubbly and chewy crust. So that's why you want to have it at room temperature. It's not going to go bad. There's no milk, there's no eggs, there's no dairy, there's nothing in here that is going to go bad, so don't worry. 6 hours, 24 hours, I guess you could push it to 4. Just take the time, do it the night before, let it sit overnight, and you will have the most delicious crust you've ever had in your life. Now, olive oil. I use extra virgin olive oil on all of my cooking. You can see here, right, there's little stuff in there, right? This is simply rosemary and garlic. I clipped trimmings from my rosemary tree. You can get it at the grocery store if you don't have a rosemary tree. Then we just put some cloves of garlic unpeeled in the oil, and your oil will have just the most amazing scent to it. Now, you don't have to do just rosemary or garlic. You can do dried chili peppers, you can do oregano, any kind of dried herb you can put in there and infuse your olive oil, and it's cheap. This little pour right here, Amazon, $6.99. Pretty cool. So I'll see you in let's call it 12 hours. Here we go, 12 hours later, the big reveal. Your patience will be paid off and rewarded. Look how beautiful that dough looks. Portions were, I made this one a little smaller. That's fine, because now I can make this for lunch and have those for dinner, and it's going to be pizza all day. But that overnight has allowed that yeast to activate, to thrive on those sugars that were created during the process of kneading and the gluten reacting. It just looks wonderful. Now, if you wanted to, you can put this in the fridge, right? You can refrigerate this at this stage with your dough balls for no less than 24 hours, up to ideally 72 hours or 3 days. If you've got that kind of patience and you've got that kind of time, you can refrigerate it, and if you have the refrigerator space. But the thing with the refrigeration is once you refrigerate, that yeast, like we mentioned, becomes dormant, right? So what that allows to do is during that process while it's in the refrigerator and that yeast is not doing anything, it's not creating gas, your gluten bonds are getting amazing, right? The gluten still works in the low temperatures. That does not affect that part of the process. But here's the kick. When you take it out, whether it's been sitting for 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days, it has to sit at room temperature for no less than 8 hours. And the reason that is because we need time for that yeast to wake up. Right? In that 8 hours, the yeast will be becoming active from its dormant state when it was refrigerated and cold. And now we're allowing it and giving it 8 hours to feed on all of those sugars that were created in that process. Remember, that doesn't stop in the refrigerator, just the yeast. So during those 8 hours that it's sitting out, it's getting up to room temperature, your yeast is going to be doing its thing. And it's crucial you give it that time. Otherwise, you're going to get a flat, pretty boring crust. But putting it out on the countertop, room temperature, it's no problem. Nothing's going to happen to this. It's not going to go bad. It's not going to get rancid, right? It's 24 hours. Now, you're done at this point. Congratulations, you've made it. Second step of this would be the stretching, right? So we're going to do that video, not right now, but check it up right here, and you can see how to stretch these dough balls out to create your 10 to 14 inch size pizzas. In addition to that, you need a sauce recipe. We got you. Check that one out right here. Easy, easy, no bake sauce, done in 5 minutes, and it is delicious. So until next time, I'll see you in the kitchen. G2 out.